So what I hope happens for the next generation is that we're able to do a similar thing for geometry, where it's still, you build models, you build textures, you stamp on top of them, but the hope is then that there's no geometry budget, there's no triangle budget, memory budget, that we magically handle all of that stuff, and then that we have a geometric equivalent of stamping, where you go in and say, all right, we want to lop this corner off, we want to dig a little hole here, and then kind of mash something else on top of it. And that's kind of where I want to be going in the next couple of years as we look at research for next-gen platforms. But Doom 4 is being built on what we've got here. They are making the decision, like the single-player game at least is going to be running at 30 hertz instead of 60, so they can just do whatever we do and then 3 times as much of it. So that will wind up allowing them to differentiate themselves there without having to write a whole lot of new technology. There's still debate about whether, personally I think it would be a good idea if the multiplayer stayed 60 hertz on that, and that's going to be kind of separately developed, so we may wind up going that route there. But I hope to be able to get off to fundamental research again fairly soon, to be able to work for figuring out what we want to do as the next generational switch comes along, so that we can actually be positioned for early launch stuff rather than kind of mid-life cycle. We have really in this generation moved away from using mods as an excuse for technical directions on there, because what we found is that as we move through the Doom 3 generation, it's just really hard for an amateur mod team to wind up doing something that integrates well with professional level creation. In the early games, when anybody could kind of scribble out something on there and say, look at my unique element without having to look professional, I think that was sort of the golden age of what people would do in sort of the Quake time frame. But now, we do not have specific initiatives to make like kind of mod capable stuff on here. I expect that we'll do the thing that I always manage to do, just throw a bunch of code at people that they want to explore, but that's more for, it'll wind up being more for people doing sort of personal research and doing some types of things there. I can't say that I expect a vibrant mod scene for Rage there, and I have a good sense of where technology is going, but larger things about what businesses may choose to do, and big businesses like Microsoft and Sony, those are decisions that are above my pay grade and not really in my my line of interest in what I think about a lot. There are many things that looking on the half full positive side, there's a lot of fabulous stuff out there. I do think that Xbox Live, the advent of that, and the App Store with the iPhone are wonderful signs about the future of digital distribution on there. I think that I think there's a decent chance that one of the next-gen consoles will probably be without optical media, that the uptake rates that people have on Broadband Connect surprised everyone this generation. It's higher than what any of the core publishers and even the first-party people expected. So the idea of having a next-gen console with next-gen graphics, lots of memory that just has an Ethernet port on back is potentially interesting. The whole jockeying for who's going to release next-gen console first is very interesting and really divorced from the technical side of things. Whether Sony wants to try and jump the gun to prevent the same kind of 360 lag from happening to them again seems likely. As developers, we would really like to see this generation stretch as long as possible. We'd like to see it be quite a few more years before a next-gen console comes out. But I suspect someone will wind up shipping something earlier rather than later. But we do have a very good sense of where the technology is going, because we talk to NVIDIA, we talk to Intel, we talk to ATI, AMD, and they're all pursuing various variations on massively multi-core graphics processor integration on there, and there's lots of interesting things about that, about how we need to think about things in the game development side to take advantage of that, what graphics technologies will do differently, and the big question is whether we're going to be able to do sort of a raycast primitive for a lot of things. Certainly we'll still be doing a lot of conventional stuff like animated characters and things like that. Very likely will be drawn, not too incredibly differently than they're drawn now. But I do hope that we'll be able to actually use some form of sparse voxel octree representation cast stuff for the geometry in the world, for the things that are going to be rigid bodied. Maybe we'll have deformations on things like that. But that's the big research project I'm excited to get back to here in the relatively near future. Because we can prototype that stuff right now on current hardware. And if we're just thinking that, well, this type of thing will be 10 times faster on the hardware that winds up shipping for there, we'll be able to learn a lot from that. So the exact questions about, it's almost silly thinking about how much resources we've got. You know, the next console is going to have 2 gigs of memory, and I love that part of the industry here. It's just that we talk about these absurd things about how many teraflops of processing and gigs of memory that are going into our game machines. You know, it's just great. And there's going to be at least another generation like that. Although, interestingly, we are coasting towards some fundamental physical limits on things. You know, we've already pretty much hit the megahertz wall on there. There's eventually going to be a power density wall, for which you won't get more processing out there. Then there will be questions about, do we shift to sort of a cloud computing infrastructure on there where you wind up, for a given dollar amount of processing power on there, if it's shared across people to run at 100% duty cycle, you can get more out of it. Lots of interesting ideas about, do you wind up having the computing in your living room at all versus somewhere else? And there are fundamental latency issues to be worried about there, but for a lot of games, there's interesting possibilities with all that. And certainly the easier aspect of that is kind of net as storage there, where it's all digital distribution. You could wind up doing an InTech 5-like thing with textured world here and blow it out to World of Warcraft size. So you need 100 petabytes of storage at your central game system. We can do that now. That's not an absurd thing to actually talk about. If you spend, games are already in the tens of millions of dollar budgets, and that's probably going to continue to climb on there. The idea about putting millions of dollars in centralized storage with hierarchical caches going across there, not unreasonable to at least consider. So there are architectures for other games and the ways we could put together games that are interesting coming up. And it would be nice if the direct distribution goes on. It does open up just all sorts of nice things. It's not there this generation that you'd focus on it. And certainly even Doom 4, we are still focused on traditional packaged goods for all of that. But it'll be interesting to see how things go forward and how people continue to do well on Xbox Live and App Store and Steam and all these other options. So there's lots of, the industry is still very, very exciting in terms of the things that are coming and changing, and that's what kind of keeps anything in this technology industry so much more interesting than a more static industrial areas that the canvases that we work on, the tools at our disposal, every project, it's pretty much completely new. We may choose to continue on with things that we've got because it doesn't make sense to throw them out yet, but the situation's changed enough that you're at least thinking every single time about, is it time to go change something here, or what can I get if I start from scratch and try to exploit something new here? And I've got my next, at least the next 4 years are pretty much spoken for. That is the thing about these large projects and the large time frames of technology cycles. I've got a pretty clear idea what I'm doing for quite some years into the future. And we've even got various fallback plans for if somebody jumps the gun on the next console launch, or if Doom is slipping on there. Like, we might have, what I plan to do is set up a new rendering engine that coexists with the current one on there. And in fact, I intend to develop it like that so that you can actually sort of be running InTech 5 version and then have everything else working the same, and then sort of have an alternate data set that you could render with a different version. So the hope would be that if we do get some flashy new graphics hardware on there, that we would have the option of possibly releasing a game cross-generational like that, where same game, same design across everything, but different media set, different rendering engine on there. And that also allows me to work on something without having to involve the entire team. That's something where we can take a couple people, go out, work on prototyping proof of concept, while the rest of the company is building the kind of production titles on there. And that's where, again, in the past when we were only one team at a time on there were always these ugly lags where we'd finish Quake 3, and then I'd start figuring out what the Doom 3 technology was going to be like, and a lot of the company we'd be working on mission packs or helping licensees and stuff like that, but it certainly wasn't an optimal thing for keeping the mainline company teams fully occupied.